My first job out of high school was the night shift at a 7-Eleven on the outskirts of town. For the most part, it was the most boring job imaginable, and I'm pretty sure I was half asleep for the majority of my time on the clock. What made it a lot more simple than the same shift at other locations was the fact that after midnight, I was only allowed to let customers into the store if they were paying for gas with cash at the register. Otherwise, the store was functionally closed for most of my shift, and my job had more to do with cleaning and replacing things to prepare for the morning shift. That was the perk of being right by the interstate exit. I barely ever had to deal with people, and that was great for me because I've always had more than a fair deal of social anxiety. However, it's not like my first real job helped me get over any of it. In all honesty, what happened during my last shift there definitely set me back several years. It started out like any normal shift. Monday nights were always super dead. A few cars came through to get gas in the first hour, but nobody came into the store. I was so bored that I had already started mopping before the store even closed. About halfway through the aisles, I realized it was a few minutes past 12, so I stepped away to go lock the front door and flip the sign from open to closed. Right as I did this, I took another look outside, and that's when I saw the creepiest night shift freak I've ever seen, walking through the pumping station toward the front door. He looked like he was taller than the gas pumps, and just about wider than one too. Disturbingly, he locked eyes with me as he approached and didn't look away. I could see that he didn't have a car, so I was relieved that I wouldn't have to let him inside. I pointed to the closed sign and double-checked that the door was locked, then walked back to the mop bucket right before we got face to face. He rattled the door and started knocking on the glass immediately. I turned away and broke eye contact, hoping that if I ignored him for a few minutes, he would just go away. For a moment, I thought it had worked because I couldn't hear him anymore. Unfortunately, by the time I finished mopping the aisles in the bathroom and got up to mop the area in front of the door, he was still there. It startled me the way he was just waiting, crouched down to my eye level with his gigantic hands up against the glass, so he could stare inside with this super intense smile.
Open up, I want Slurpee.
Sorry, but we're closed. The register is for gas purchases only after 12 o'clock. Immediately, that jolly expression drained from his face and he scowled at me before backing off and walking away. The encounter gave me the creeps, but I was able to just shrug it off thinking he was gone. I finished mopping the rest of the store, and after I drained the bucket, I decided to take a 5 or 10 minute break in the back room while the floor dried. When I went back to the register and looked out the front door, I saw the last thing I wanted to see. That freakishly tall man was back, and now he was standing outside beside a car by one of the gas pumps. By the time I noticed him, he was already staring at me. I swore under my breath as he started making his way to the door again. Here was the exact sort of interaction that I dreaded every single night, and now it was about to happen.
Pump number 4.
How are you paying?
Cash.
My heart sank as I knew there was no avoiding letting him into the store for any reason other than outright denying him, which I was too nervous to do. He was the sort of person I expected to break down the door if I rubbed him the wrong way. Reluctantly, I walked around the counter and unlocked the door for him. I wanted to put some space between us, so I walked right back around to the register so he'd have to open the door himself. When I was at the register, he was already waiting, looming over me by at least 2 feet. How much are you putting on pump 4? That's when the brute grabbed me by my collar and screamed in my face.
Slurpee, I want Slurpee. Give me Slurpee.
Then he lifted me up over the counter like I was nothing. For a split second, I was so high in the air that I thought he was going to slam me against the ground and crack my skull open, but I was saved by a lucky shot. While I was flailing in his grasp, I managed to push off by kicking my feet straight to his chest, making him drop me to the floor and stagger back. I took my moment to get away and sprinted into the bathroom and locked the door behind me, calling the police immediately. From there, it was a waiting game of being terrified that he'd try to break the lock on the door, something I'm sure he could have done if he wanted to. Luckily, the police were only a few minutes away. By the time they arrived, the brute was gone, and so was everything in the Slurpee machine. But strangely, the car from earlier was still parked outside by the pump. When the cops went over to investigate it, they found an unconscious man slumped over in the driver's seat. I was fine, so the ambulance that the dispatcher had called in for me ended up taking that guy to the hospital. After he was gone, the cops had me show them the security footage from the night. We saw that giant creep walk up to the car right after it parked and smash the driver's side window. Then he appeared to have strangled the man inside before stuffing him out of view so he could pose as the owner of the car. The part that gets me though is despite the fact that this weirdo was the most distinct looking person I've ever seen, he has never been found. How a 7+ foot tall giant simply disappears, I don't know. One thing I do know is that someone who would go through so much trouble and be so violent over something as minor as a Slurpee is someone I never want to see again. If he ever showed up again, I'd be scared for my life. And that's just not the social anxiety speaking. Needless to say, I can't work at 7-Elevens anymore. This story was inspired by a New York 7-Eleven. It was reported that a bandit would intentionally steal cups of Slurpee nearly every day for a month while taunting employees as he walks out. The culprit was said to be described as a large man in his late 30s to early 40s. The 7-Eleven employees have stated that they tried to catch the man, but were unable to since he committed the thefts during the store's busiest hours. Police have yet to find the man. In 2017, I was still living in Australia as an international exchange student. During most of that time, I also had to work a job at 7-Eleven to pay for my expenses that weren't covered by the exchange program. The only hours I was available to work were the night shift, which was a grueling experience. It didn't help that the area was pretty sketchy. The 7-Eleven is where all the homeless people, gangbangers, and streetwalkers flocked to late at night, and the high crime rate made everything that much more chaotic. There was usually some kind of bad element loitering in or around the store, which always put me on edge. The second I looked away, somebody would be fighting, stealing, dealing, or sneaking off into the bathroom for 45 minutes doing who knows what. I didn't get paid enough to do anything about it, but it was always anxiety-inducing just to be stuck in there to run the register. All that aside, there was only one night working there that was just too much for me to handle. Actually, I still have nightmares about this experience. It was just that frightening. Oddly enough, the night started out as a better night than most, which to me meant there wasn't anything weird or sketchy happening outside and nobody was causing trouble inside. Everything was pretty bearable for about 2 hours, but then at around 1 a.m., the night took a turn for the worse. A trans woman walked in holding an axe. She gave me the creeps just from the empty look in her eyes, and the fact that she was carrying that axe was all the more unsettling. For a second, she just stood in the front of the door and stared at me.
Excuse me, ma'am, you can't bring that in here. You mean this?
Suddenly, she raised the axe into the air, then stepped towards the register before dropping it onto the counter. I jumped back instinctively, thinking that I was about to get robbed, but then the woman leaned over and said the most disturbing thing.
You know this axe means I can get into your store whenever I want, right? You know why? See that glass right there on your door? This axe could go right through it, like it wasn't even there. So don't tell me what I can and can't bring in here, alright? Because I can get to you whenever I want. I'm sure it could, and I'm sure you could, but... But what? Huh? What are you gonna say to me?
I bit my tongue and held myself back from threatening to call the police for the moment. I was afraid of what her reaction might be. She didn't seem to be alright in the head, and you just can't predict people like that.
How can I help you? Help me? What do you mean, help me? Do you think I need help? What? No, I meant, like, is there anything I can get for you from the store? Don't cop an attitude with me, punk! You know what else this axe could cut through with ease? Your skull! So shut up! Ma'am, if you threaten me again, I'll have to call the cops.
Saying that felt like pulling the pin on a grenade, but it was my only option to deal with her as she was becoming increasingly aggressive and could resort to violence at any moment. Her jaw clenched up and she gave me a death glare, causing me to back away in fear. She chewed on what I said for a very tense few seconds before responding. You're gonna call the cops on me? Why? What did I do wrong? Nothing! You just have a problem with me, don't you? Is it because the way I look? All you imbeciles are all the same! Every one of you! Well,
I don't want anything from your crummy store anyway, loser!
At last, she took the axe in her hand, backed off, then stormed out of the store. I breathed a sigh of relief that she didn't swing that axe on anyone, but my heart was still racing, and there was a mark on the counter from where she dropped the head of the axe onto it. A few minutes later, a female patron came walking into the store, followed by a male. They shopped around the aisles for a bit before coming up to the register around the same time. I started cashing out the female customer first, but just as I was about done scanning her items, my heart sank as I saw that same woman from earlier walk through the door again, still holding the axe. This time, she looked enraged, far more than before. That's when I saw the male patron engaging with the woman as she stared him down with the axe, saying,
"What are you looking at? What are you doing with that axe? Why do you care? Because you could hurt somebody with that thing. You're right!"
In a flash, the woman lunged over and lifted the axe to do the unthinkable.
What the hell is wrong with you?
The male patron immediately collapsed, bleeding profusely, having taken the blow for the female patron who tried to run away. But all hell broke loose when that psycho woman chased after her and struck her from behind, dropping her to the ground. Finally, the psycho looked back at me. I'll never forget the expression on her face. Half unbridled psychotic rage, half deer in the headlights. I thought she was about to come after me, but something must have spooked her, because after a moment, she suddenly sprinted away. I thought both the man and the woman were dead, but they started to make noises. That awful moaning of the gravely injured is something I'll never forget. I called OOO and tried to do what I could for them before the ambulance arrived. By that time, it was out of my hands. I was a mess, totally distraught. I thought neither of them would make it, but miraculously, they both survived. It was alleged that while the psycho was running away, she started chasing multiple random pedestrians on the street, trying to take a swing at them. Luckily, she didn't injure anyone else further. I still don't know why she attacked those other people and not me, but I try not to wonder too much. Of course, everything was on camera. She was caught and put in prison, but that does nothing to erase the memory. This story was inspired by a viral incident that occurred at a Sydney 7-Eleven that shocked the nation. Here is the footage prior to the random attack. The woman has been sentenced to 9 years behind bars. After a follow-up, it has been said that her jail term will be increased by 5 years. What makes this case more disturbing was how the woman alleges that she did not remember anything. I was driving through town to visit some close family when I suddenly needed to pee, and so I made a pit stop and pulled over at the nearest gas station, which happened to be a 7-Eleven along the way. I've made that trip 1,000 times, so the people who work there know me by now, but on this particular day, I was caught off guard by the atmosphere I walked into. The clerk didn't even greet me or say anything to me. He was frozen stiff and just stared at me with this deathly serious look in his eyes. It stopped me in my tracks. I looked around in confusion and noticed that the lights were particularly dim too, like the store was closed, but there were a couple of other customers inside still. One was in the chips aisle with his hands in his pockets and his eyes glued to the ground, and the other one was by the coolers, leaned over with his forehead resting against the glass, but neither of them looked like they intended to grab anything anytime soon. It was so strange. I remembered that I still had to pee, and I could figure out what was going wrong with everyone else after I took care of myself. I made my way to the back of the store and toward the restroom, avoiding the person by the coolers. I was just about to walk up to the door and get my relief, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw another man crouching down behind the shelf right next to me. I didn't have time to react before he sprang out and stopped me. He pulled up his shirt and revealed a gun tucked into his waistband. Then he said, "Don't move, lady, and don't say nothing either." I nodded at this threat. Of course, I wasn't going to say anything. I was just then realizing why all the people in the store were acting so gaunt and petrified. I'd walked straight into a hostage situation. I could feel my soul leaving my body as the man said, "Now go back to the front door and don't take your eyes off the hot food. You hear me?" I nodded once more and turned my head slowly to shuffle my way to the counter. As I got to where I was supposed to be, I traded a moment's glance with the clerk. We knew each other sort of, and it was like he was trying to tell me he was sorry, but I felt like a moron for not picking up on what was going on sooner and getting out of there while I could. Instead, I became another hostage in this store full of mannequins, forced to stare at those revolving metal trays with the spinning hot dogs under those obnoxious radiator lamps, just watching them go around and around endlessly. All the while, the robber was rifling through everything in the store right behind me. My heart hadn't pounded like that in years. There was so much adrenaline in my veins, and as I couldn't even move, it was all turning into a panic. I had just come into the store to use the bathroom, and now I had to go even worse than before. I started to worry if I wouldn't be able to make it. As the seconds dragged on, my judgment became more and more clouded by fear. It seemed like he was never going to finish what he was doing and let us be. Finally, in a split-second decision, I made a run for it. I ran to the door and got right up to it, almost home free before I heard a loud gunshot right behind me. I froze, knowing that he was right behind me and that I probably pissed him off. He grabbed me at the base of the neck and whispered in my ear saying, "You're really stupid for an old lady. You know that? You must be senile or something. Well, since you didn't get it the first time, I'll tell you again. If you try me, the next bullet's gonna go through you. Got it?" I nodded silently. I was absolutely petrified. It seemed like if I even flinched, it would be the end. But then, the dire situation took another turn as we saw a legion of cops pulling into the parking lot and surrounding the store. Damn it, this is all your fault for wasting my time, you geezer.
I'm sorry.
Shut up! Let me think, you old hag! He pressed the barrel of the gun into my side as he glared outside and surveyed the scene from over my shoulder. I knew there was no way that this situation ended without somebody getting hurt, and I was directly in the crossfire. Suspect, we have the area surrounded. All exits are blocked. Disarm yourself and exit the building with your hands in the air. Shut up! Alright, listen to me. Here's what's gonna happen. We're gonna walk out of this store, and I'm gonna get in my car. Those pigs out there are gonna let me walk away from this because you're coming with me. Got that? I nodded and then he pushed me forward. I slowly fumbled my way out of the door, and as soon as we were outside, the cops started screaming at him with their guns drawn. "Let her go and get on the ground, now!" The man didn't even heed them at all. He kept pushing me along toward one of the cars that was parked in front of the store, the one I assumed was his. I didn't have any other choice but to go along with it, but even then I knew that this was all about to get out of hand no matter what I did. I was positive that I was about to wind up dead, when out of nowhere, somebody ripped the gun out of the robber's hand and tore him off of me. I immediately ran away, looking back to see that it was the clerk who'd come out of the store and taken the thief by surprise. That's when the pandemonium ensued, as the two of them wrestled over the gun while the police swarmed in a mass of screaming, shouting angry bodies. Eventually, everything was untangled and the low-life thief was dragged away in handcuffs. Then, a couple of the cops asked to take my statement at the scene, but I said,
No, take me to the nearest precinct. I have to pee.
and that was true. Aside from the toilet at the police station, I've never been able to use a public restroom ever since. This story was inspired by a hostage situation that went down at a Denver 7-Eleven. A woman was held hostage alongside two other patrons in the store. After hours of negotiation, the police were able to handle the situation accordingly, leaving no injured hostages except for the suspect himself. The suspect was later taken to the hospital and eventually died of his wounds.